Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first presentation in the spring lecture series of the Armenian Studies program. And on behalf of the Armenian Studies program, I'd like to welcome all of you here. When you came in today, you may have seen this yellow flyer, and you can pick one of these up when you leave today. But this tells you a little bit about some of our upcoming activities. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up in the next few weeks so that you can know a little bit more. On Wednesday, February the 12th, Dr. Levon Chukasyan will be here from Yerevan State University in Armenia. And he's going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is the Armenians of the Crimea and Romania as seen through their art. And Professor Chukasyan has spent, in the last few months, several weeks in Romania and in the Crimea, looking at some of the new art that has been uncovered there, some of the new churches. And there was such a large Armenian community in that area of the world in Eastern Europe, and he will be talking about the Armenian art in that area. On Thursday, February the 20th, also at 7:30 p.m., Dr. Artina Slanyan, who is from Marist College in New York, is going to speak on the topic of the Armenians, Georgians, Azerbaijanis, Arabs, and Jews, the British colonial ethos after World War I. And he's basically going to look at how the British, as the imperial power after World War I, treated the smaller groups within the area. So he's going to speak on Thursday, February the 20th. Both of those lectures will be in this hall in our Alice Peters Auditorium. And I just want to alert you also that in the next few weeks you may see some changes in the way that the parking lots are being numbered. They're changing the designations from letter designations to number designations. Obviously, we're not going to change any place that we're at, but we're going to start using the new designations pretty soon. And you'll see the signs going up much better than they are now as to what's going on with it. I would like to thank also tonight the Leon S. Peters Foundation for their financial support of our lecture series, so we thank the foundation for that. Dr. Marchese is our guest speaker tonight. He's been with us just last year speaking about the first part of his research along with Dr. Marlene Brew. And his work focuses on the Armenian art in the city of Constantinople. And last time he came, he discussed how the very large Armenian population of Constantinople over the years had developed what comes to be called the Constantinople style of art. I'm not going to say much more because he is a very engaging speaker and can tell you all about all of those parts of the lecture that he's going to talk about. Now, he's been working at the Armenian Patriarchate in Constantinople. There are still 30 Armenian churches in Constantinople, and he and his colleagues have visited the archives of those churches, and that's where they have done the research on the art there. I would like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Marchese. He's a graduate of Fresno State. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in history, and then later continued with his doctorate degree from the New York University. And he is now a professor emeritus from the University of Minnesota at Duluth, where for many years he taught ancient history, archaeology in the Department of Humanities and Classics. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Dr. Ron Marchese. Dr. Marchese?
Thank you very much. Hopefully I will not bore you. I tend to talk way too much. I thought for certain that Barlow was going to mention the fact that in the parking lots they were going to replant trees. But obviously that probably would be beyond the capacity of some of the administration. And I shouldn't say things that negative, but trees are much better than cement. Our topic for tonight, and it's really a very interesting one, Treasures of Faith. Art and society in Armenian Constantinople. If we do use the term Istanbul or Istanbul, which is probably more Macedonian Greek than anything else, please forgive me for that. And this is going to be some thoughts on the community from 1500 onwards. And most of those thoughts are going to be derived from the physical record of the material culture. In many respects, this study would not have been possible without the blessing of His Beatitude Mesrop II and now the acting patriarch Aram Teshian, since Mesrop II is incapacitated in relation to his duties as Patriarch of Constantinople and all of Turkey. The first of the two volumes, we have just finished the page proofs on the second volume, which deals with treasures of faith, and that's going to be the metal objects, is the accompanying book to Splendor and Pageantry on the textile treasures from the Armenian Orthodox churches of Istanbul or Constantinople. It did win a major prize in ethnographic studies, and that is off to the right, the Shep Foundation for the Textile Society of America. We are very, very pleased that there was international recognition for this unknown treasure of miniature art done in a very, very difficult form, and that is with needle, thread, and cloth. It is, by the way, also gender specific because it was primarily the work, the handicraft work of women in their opportunities to participate in the Divine Liturgy. As you can see here on number 43, since our arrow is there, Armenia was more than a frontier province. It was an integral part of a defensive strategy in depth to protect the eastern areas of the Roman Empire. In essence, Armenia was a buffer region laid waste by opposing armies for centuries. It also was a crossroads of culture, east as well as west. In fact, right on this area here, which should be right there, at the site that's being excavated currently, it's the site of Zuma, Z-E-U-G-A-M-A, which was a Roman frontier town. It is quite obvious that the region, not only of Armenia, but also the frontier area, was extremely wealthy. In fact, the number of mosaics that have been found in the houses of cashiered Roman legionnaires is the second highest concentration now in the entire ancient world. So it does really indicate, again, from a Roman perspective, the very interesting cross-fertilization that takes place in material culture studies overall. Religious art, the arts are the fingerprints of a nation left behind throughout the ages for others to examine and admire and learn. It is a window through which the soul of a nation is portrayed. It's a reflection of its culture during triumph, defeat, joy, and sorrow. In Armenian art, primacy is placed on the unique manifestation of Christian church architecture and probably more so the brilliance of the illuminated manuscript tradition, the enhancement for the Word of God. Unfortunately, there are few surviving objects dating from before the year 1600, especially in metal, because precious metals were used and therefore they have their own value as bullion. Mostly illuminated manuscripts, many of those are attributed to the patronage of the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia in the 13th century, and a scattering of brilliant architectural remains of various periods. So one of the great achievements in Armenian art, architecture, is fixed. It's fixed in a specific location, whereas the other part, that is the illuminated manuscript tradition, and to a lesser extent, other movable objects, textiles as well as metal objects, those are mobile in nature, and those have survived. I think there's about 33,000 illuminated manuscripts in total. Certainly there were probably much more. Under the rule of Hethum I, Cilicia, and this is very important in understanding the influence of Western European art into the matrix of Armenian art in the 13th and 14th century. Cilicia was the largest and wealthiest kingdom between Byzantium, the Muslim empires, and the newly created Crusader states. International trade, wealthy patrons to underwrite extraordinary achievements in architecture and general material culture are quite evident. It is this unique location, again, location is just about everything, in this unique location and the geopolitics of the region and international world, the Crusades and their successor states, that brought Latin and Western ideas into the world of Armenia and Armenian religious culture. And so we do get an influence that comes in at a very early date. We see that especially in relation to the illuminated manuscript tradition of the 13th century. Armenian rule in Cilicia proved beneficial to the development of Armenian culture. Contemporary with the Crusades, especially the Fourth Crusade of 1204, and the establishment of the Latin Kingdom of Constantinople between 04 and 61, and the older Latin kingdoms and principalities of the Levant, The Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia was well connected to the European military orders of the Hospitallers and the Teutonic Knights. In fact, many of those individuals did intermarry with Armenian women, both at the non-aristocratic level as well as the aristocratic level. And so you do get this fusion, a physical fusion of humans as well as a physical fusion of culture. Due to military necessities and the protection of the Cilician frontier under these military orders, Cilician ports were open to merchants from the Italian republics with special privileges granted to the Genoese, the Venetians, and the Pisans. This would be obviously very important in the run-up to the Renaissance that will develop in those regions. Common commercial and military interests also stimulated artistic experimentation. Sharing a common cause with their Christian brethren, the Kingdom of Cilicia developed as a major cultural center that featured evolving international trends, especially in the arts. As a Franco-Byzantine style emerged in Constantinople and its environs, especially in painting and sculpture, new methods of interpreting well-established themes in Armenian religious art, still partially influenced by Byzantine constructs, evolved into a brilliant display of color and composition unknown in the previous centuries. This is especially evident in the illuminated manuscript tradition that developed in the 13th century as seen in the work of the gifted artist Theodore Rosselin, the foremost illuminator of medieval Armenia, and his students. Although Rosselin's works and those he influenced contain many connections with the art and iconography of the Crusader period, their artistic achievements redefined and energized Armenian religious art. These pages come from an illuminated manuscript in the Patriarchate Museum dated to 1223, and the use of color, especially in the facial tones and so forth, is far removed from the icon painters of the Byzantine and Greek heritage. There is a more lively expression here, and I think part of that is certainly derived from this emerging international and cosmopolitan world that existed in southeastern Anatolia. Armenian populations, in many respects, the size of the area of the circles indicates the size overall. This is going to be a major issue of contention, no doubt, with the Turkish government under Recep Erdogan when we come up to the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide of 2015. Since the government is on record since 2000, 2003, that the numbers are highly inflated, which they are not. In fact, if anything, they are probably underinflated overall. But the population of Armenians within the Ottoman world was substantial and certainly much larger in the areas of Georgia, the Caucasus areas, and as we move into areas of modern-day Romania, as was indicated by my colleague here. Okay, one of the things that's interesting is there was a substantial population of Armenians also east of Heraklion and Crete. And again, those areas did interact and did take into account the artistic developments that were certainly taking place within a post-Byzantine emerging Greek Orthodox culture after 1500. Areas of population density and migration eventually after the establishment of the Patriarchate of Constantinople in 1461. This became a major draw, especially from the eastern areas of Anatolia, for Armenian craftsmen and families who found opportunities that no longer existed in the Eastern world, since there was, that is Eastern Anatolia, since there was no patronage from a politically defined state. And so in this manner, after 1461, the church does become the major patron in relation to stimulating the artistic developments that will take place. Actually, in many respects, one of the things we can indeed talk about is the rise of cosmopolitanism, which creates a hybrid culture drawn from numerous sources. There were eventually 5 patriarchal sees, and eventually, by about 1700, the primacy of Istanbul or Constantinople does gain a priority, even over the Catholicos at Etchmiadzin. And the reason why is because it was predominantly recognized by the Ottoman authorities. And so, as one Armenian scholar stated, Der Nasserian, it was the Ottoman state that basically created the primacy of that Armenian patriarchate in Constantinople or Istanbul in general. Cosmopolitan environment, and it becomes extremely important. Certainly at the time of the conquest of Constantinople, the city had declined to about 40,000 people, and there really was no cosmopolitan heritage per se. This will develop with the reestablishment of the imperial authority and the importance of Constantinople as the imperial capital of a new state. By the 18th century, the evolution of the Constantinople style patterned an increase in the Armenian population of the city. Continuous Armenian migration from eastern, central, and western Anatolia infused the city with a number of regional and sub-regional styles that would never have fused together without that focal point being Constantinople. They added bold elements to an otherwise conservative and exhausted urban material culture that was mostly Byzantine in nature. By the 18th century, European cultural influences into the Oriental flavor of the Ottoman capital fostered a more cosmopolitan atmosphere that enhanced experimentation outside the accepted canons of Armenian church art. Unlike Greek Orthodox religious art, which was extremely conservative and never really changed, especially in icon painting, it was quite obvious that the Armenian artisans of Constantinople were willing to experiment. That is, to take the old themes and define them with the use of new patterns, not as imitators. That's one of the major problems in relation to when a cosmopolitan style develops. Is it imitation? And the answer is it was not. They maintained the flavor of Eastern Anatolia and their regional and sub-regional areas, but found new expressions in the emerging and eventually prevailing artistic canons of the 18th and 19th century. When we take a look at the metalwork especially, the commitment to detail is still extraordinary, and also with the castings and so forth of specific features that are relevant to Armenian religious life and Armenian theology, which it is different obviously from the Latin West and the Greek East. Eastern Anatolia had a number of regional and sub-regional styles, especially in the embroidery traditions. Not many have actually examined these overall, and it's really very sad because there is material there that could really define some of these styles, the Gaziantep style, the Marash style, especially in embroidery work. Artistic experimentation obviously needs patrons. Although the church was initially the source of such patronage, this was eventually surpassed, certainly beginning in 1750, by an Armenian aristocracy. They're called the Amira or the Amira class. Their wealth and special status within the Armenian community attracted Armenian artisans and their families to the city in order to gain valuable commissions. This continuous flow of talent refreshed and kept alive native traditions in the Constantinople style. New ideas for interpreting common themes from the West did not create imitators. In this manner, artistic achievement matched the growing opulence and grandeur of a city many Armenians came to love as their own. Through their labors, Istanbul and the church prospered, and in time, the Armenian community became one of the most important ethnic groups in the city. The Constantinople style coincides with the rise of the Amiralar. Okay? Now, and I put this in block letters today, no small population. There are over 56, I think 56 Armenian Orthodox churches in Istanbul by 1850. That does not count the 4 Armenian Protestant churches or the 12 Armenian Catholic churches. If you add those, there's well over 70 recognized churches serving a variety of congregations. Some approximate neighborhoods, some neighborhoods were large and very prosperous. By far the most prosperous was the Church of the Holy Cross, Serb Hotch in Üsküdar. This is where one of the most important Armenians of any generation, Harutian Bejian, came from, who passes away in 1833. But then others in the Kumkapi, Yenikapi, Samatya, Beyazıt areas, as you can see here around the Patriarchate, which is where the star is, were densely populated. Okay, this was no small population. And in fact, if we look at both the Ottoman records, census records of 1875, and the patriarchal records at the same time, along with the Greek Orthodox population and other Christian groups, they made up the majority of the population of the Ottoman capital at well over 52 to 55%. It is only in the latter part of the 19th century, especially with the influx of Armenians from the Caucasus after the wars with Imperial Russia, that the problems that exist that leads to the genocide of 1915 arise. Why? Very simply, who was in charge and who were the favored populations in the city that had expertise in a variety of things? The Ottoman Mint initially was under the direction of the Hebraic Jewish population of the city until 1750. The records were kept in Hebrew or in Yiddish. After 1750 until at least 1850 and beyond, the imperial mint was organized by Armenians, specific families like the Dadians and others, and the records were kept in Armenian. The heads of the gunpowder mills that had modernized the ability of the Ottomans to produce more gunpowder were in the hands of Armenians. Many viziers held their position in the imperial court to the Armenian financiers and bankers that supported them. This was no small population by numbers, and it was no population without significance. And especially after the Greek War of Independence in 1823, the Armenians were considered the most loyal of all subject millets within the Ottoman state. In fact, Bejian himself and others were courted officials by the Ottoman royal families. The sultanas and the sultans stayed in their homes as honored guests amongst friends. And so in many respects, when we take a look at the dynamics prior to 1850, the relationships were indeed quite friendly and mutually respectful. One of the things that I find very interesting from the patriarchal records is the number of silversmiths. Again, size of the circle indicates the numbers. Certainly around the Patriarchate itself, 31 to 33 in Beşiktaş, in this area here, there were well over 17, and they satisfied the needs not only of the church and of those people that were making donations to the church, objects of faith, okay, but also for the secular needs of the community. And so in this respect, when you get down to Üsküdar here, we have again a substantial number of silversmiths that more than anything else satisfied the needs of a very, very wealthy population of merchants and bankers that were instrumental in choosing and selecting the patriarch for the church. This is the area of Kumkapi. The Patriarchate is right there, destroyed partially in 1999. And the Holy Mother of God Cathedral is here. This is the Mesrab II Matufian Cultural Center here, and then there's another church right here. So right in this area, by the way, it is a mixed neighborhood. It was a mixed neighborhood of Greeks. The Greek Orthodox Cathedral is right there. Unfortunately, there's no congregation that attends it. And all along the side, you can see it outlined very nicely here. Now there are all shops, but there were numerous religious buildings and structures and chapels. Along this street here, in this area right here, was a substantial building attached to the Patriarchate, which probably no doubt housed priests and visitors. certainly back in the 19th century. The buildings are unfortunately in very, very poor state of repair. The government is not allowing any opportunities for restoration of some of these really quite lovely Western-style architectural designs of the 19th century. Okay, physical context after 1500. Church architecture, both single and multi-nave structures, they follow a basilica plan. They don't follow the traditional plans as we find in Eastern Anatolia or in Armenia. Structures with side chapels, there were barrel vaulted ceilings, interior predominantly neoclassical in design. That would be the federal style here in the United States. Exteriors, not conspicuous. They blended into the neighborhoods. Why? Because they, even though they were predominantly in Armenian neighborhoods, there was still the general fear of attack or destruction of church property. So there's only, they are surrounded by substantial walls, which does not exist certainly in Armenia or in Eastern Anatolia, where the churches are freestanding in their own right. Interior space is very intimate in nature. Neighborhoods. Let's go back. Ethnically homogeneous Armenian or mixed neighborhoods of either Christian, Greek Orthodox, or Turkish Muslim. The epigraphic context, colophons or inscriptions on objects reconstruct and identify the social hierarchies. And this is the area that I've moved now into. What do these artifacts tell us? Well, many of them, especially the metal artifacts, have inscriptions. And we could see that by the 19th century, there's a major change taking place in the social structure of Armenian communities to the point that they're challenging the status quo before the national constitution arises. That is, the merchant class and the artisan class is not only participating artistically in the doctrinal disputes in terms of theological concerns, but they're usurping the titles of the aristocracy. That is, they're defining themselves as neighborhood congregational aristocrats with rights that were not recognized by the Ottomans or by the Armenian elites. Okay? So the epigraphy, which is as an archaeologist, and that's my primary training, we always look at inscriptions to justify historical texts. And I'm amazed that no one has looked either at Etchmiadzin or at Jerusalem, at St. James, or anywhere else outside of the illuminated manuscript tradition of who these people were. That is the face behind the object. That is so important in relation to understanding the dynamics within a community. Social hierarchies of the Armenian community by neighborhood and within the city outside the known Armenian aristocracy. This is what the interiors look like. I mean, if we were in Italy or in France of the 19th century, we would say, well, this is typical. And the answer is yes, but the commitment to detail and the use of these new styles and colors of pastels, absolutely brilliant for the mobile art that is used during the time of the Divine Liturgy, both in textiles and in the array of physical objects that grace the altar and in the process of procession and so forth. It truly is a wonderful, wonderful backdrop to all of these consecrated items. And yet, you can't see the detail on those items if you're 5 to 8 feet away, because they're done in a miniature form that rivals the finest examples of non-circulating illuminated manuscripts, which were only meant for the very well-to-do or for the clergy in the process of the Divine Liturgy, or exhibited on major feast days to the rank and file. As you know, you go up, there's a page open, you kiss the manuscript and so forth. But this left a lasting imprint on the artistic minds of both artisans and especially women who created almost all of the finery that is worn by the clergy. In fact, there's something like, what, 13 prayers in the process of dressing the celebrant as each layer of cloth is added. And by the way, the patriarch made a comment when he was ordained as Patriarch of Constantinople. The coat that he wore weighed over 50 pounds of gold, silver, and precious gems. Okay? Yes. Constantinople and textile art, a unique combination of the Oriental, I know that some people don't like that term to use, and the Occidental. But it's all right with an artistic discussion, just as we can use the word primitive, though you get talk to anthropologists like myself and they go, ooh, can't say that, it's a value judgment, but in art history you can. Okay? So it depends on your field of study. Textiles are an integral part of the Armenian material culture. Both secular and religious weaving, embroidery, and needle lace were the domain of women. Gender specific, while block printing, and we'll see at least one example of a Hindu block print, there was a substantial Armenian population in Madras, India, and they specialized in block printing, which eventually was established in Constantinople in the 19th century, but not for religious items, predominantly for secular cloth, okay? And so here's a piece in Constantinople that comes from Madras. And you say, well, how do you know? Look at the figures' faces, almond eyes, okay? There's no question it is not drawn from the traditions of the Constantinople style. Embroidery was part of domestic handicraft. Embroidery schools, and that's what's down here at the bottom, one was established by Bejian. Established in the 19th century in order to fill the growing needs of the church. Many of the objects produced for the church were made at home and not factories, especially the smaller objects and apparel worn by the clergy, including mitres, crowns, chalice covers, collars, copes, stoles, altar frontals, niche covers, and altar curtains. The latter category also appears to have been produced in schools and in the cottage and in cottage industries. Between 1750 and 1850, over 55% of all Armenian Orthodox churches were founded. And since there are numerous feast days to celebrate, you have to change the raiment, not only of the celebrant, but also along the altar. Added to this, over 73 major fires between 1461 and 1875 destroyed churches on a regular basis until they were allowed to be built in stone after 1800. So, obviously, the destruction of artifacts, the need for new churches when new churches were established because the congregations had reached the point that they could support a clergy, okay, or they were given permission by the grandees that spoke for the community at the Divan, the Ottoman court. There was always a need. And then finally, things just wore out. So there was a constant need. And then finally, one of the most important things is the sheer pleasure to donate on feast days. Remembrances of those that are asleep in Christ, okay, on death or on birth. And so the community constantly enhanced the collections of the churches. The Constantinople style after the mid-18th century matured into an elaborate artistic movement that mirrored the social and cultural fabric of the city. It was based on a lavish display of pictorial scenes, intricate floral patterns, interconnected layered composition, a commitment to detail, and an extravagant use of precious metal, pearls, and gemstones. In many respects, the cosmopolitan atmosphere of Istanbul, with its diverse population and culture, and the assimilation of Armenian families and craftsmen for Eastern Anatolia, amalgamated a number of regional traditions that created a unique and uniform style recognized for its artistic flair and elaborate decoration. In many respects, the Constantinople style reflected the success of a heterogeneous Ottoman Istanbul in that, quote, sumptuary arts depended upon an atmosphere of opulence and wealthy patronage in which to thrive. A society where piety, and that's an important statement, when piety went hand in hand with a love of luxury and display, and men sought insurance for the welfare of their souls in eternity by lavish gifts to churches on earth. Much of that Armenian wealth came, right there is Armenia, or in the region, Eastern Anatolia and Armenia, Armenian wealth was derived from familial control of the silk routes, okay? The use of silk, important from not only the Ottomans, but others. And much of that wealth from silk, in terms of being entrepreneurs, was eventually converted into bullion, the gold trade. And many of those individuals that trace their lineage back into eastern Anatolia, the village of Akin especially, AKN, eventually by the late 18th century became bankers. Okay, but their wealth was still being generated through the silk trade with family members still in eastern Anatolia. And so in that manner, those bankers then fostered in the 19th century the rise of the entrepreneurial class. Okay? And many of those individuals then started sending their children off to Europe to be educated. And they came back with very strange ideas. They came back with ideas such as the Industrial Revolution. Okay? Ready for this? They came back with ideas of libertas, drawn from the Scottish intellectual movement, the English intellectual movement, the French Revolution. Okay? It's that same process that stimulated the Greeks to rise up against their Ottoman overlords in 1823. But those ideas were not lost on those children who objected to a variety of things. Number one, the lack of autonomy within the Ottoman state, even though they were a favored population. Number two, the extreme concentration of wealth and power by the Armenian Ottoman Emira class that chose the patriarch, who was made certain to speak for the concerns of the well-to-do and not the general community in nature. There was obviously something in it for those that chose and determined who would become the patriarchal see, the occupier, the patras of the community. Now, Armenians go back to Constantinople much further than 1461. The earliest Armenian church was in Galata, shared, I think, with the Genoese. Damn, Italians are always involved. Okay, I'm Italian, so I can say that. Okay, but at least, you know, they're co-religionists and they have very, very good relationship. 1306, but if we go back earlier to the ninth dynasty, we have the Macedonian Armenian dynasty. These were Armenians. But they became Byzantine in culture. Why? Very simple. If you wanted to progress within the Byzantine state, you adopted the dominant culture, period, which included religious culture, which is at odds with Armenian Orthodoxy because of the Council of Chalcedon. Okay? And there's a reason why 1461 is a traditional date, because there was no counter that possibly could challenge the Greek Orthodox Patriarch with a substantial population of Armenian Orthodox, since they were non-Chaldean in their religious views. Okay. By the way, in eastern Anatolia, it's estimated that 25% of the Byzantine army were Armenians as defenders of the faith. Okay? Transition to embroidery and religious art, Armenian examples from the churches of Constantinople, which some of you have seen already, but we're going to go very quickly through these. I like to use this because it's really very interesting, to depict that which is not depictable. Okay? These are drawn from the Greek Orthodox mosaics of the 14th century, and in both Hagia Sophia and Karyajame. Here is a 1901 Armenian embossed jajank or standard, brilliant interpretation in terms of naturalism. And so, as I said, the talents of these craftsmen were superior in nature. This is probably the oldest of the pieces. The inscriptions are very important. Okay, those individuals are listed down below. It is done in the Greek Orthodox style, the darkness of the facial features and so forth, even though it's been cleaned, but definitely done by an Armenian, because the inscription right along here blends right in. It was almost impossible to read until we digitized it, and then we changed the color spectrum. but that's there. Probably dates to about maybe 1550 or so. It's done as if it's copied from an apse of a Greek Orthodox church, and then here and here would be the side panels, okay? This is the earliest we have that is dated, 1680. On both examples, notice the flatness, okay? That means it's drawn from a Byzantine woven tradition, because embroidery creates a three-dimensional image actually off of the surface of the base fabric. And what we have here is the earliest example so far of that we saw in the textile tradition that really sort of mirrors that transition to embroidery, which certainly takes place in the last part of the Byzantine world because of the lack of wealth, okay, to support the cottage industries, the collegia of weavers in Byzantium. It is very likely that the development and adaptation of Western-inspired artistic elements can be attributed to a number of factors. It must be pointed out that, let's see, it must be pointed out that such adaptations were attached to and did not overrun the artistic and compositional flair of artisanship or talent of Armenian craftsmen. It provided new ways of interpreting the pre-existing themes that were accepted in Armenian church art. Beginning with Western influences in Cilicia in the 13th century, if not earlier, the Crusader states in the east, and the interchange between the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia, Venetians, Genoese, Franks, and the region of Constantinople, the Meccaterist monks of Sebaste or Sivas, and later Venice. In the 18th century, the inspirational patriarch Ovanes IX Golod, between 1715 and 1741, who is instrumental in the great reawakening of Armenian art, the Armenian Catholic community of the city in the 18th century, as well as the growth of the European community in general, had a substantial impact on the material culture that developed into the Constantinople style. A conservative and lingering late Byzantine tradition also helped in the continuity of Christian church art between the centuries. Finally, as more and more Armenian youths and their patrons were educated in Europe, they were introduced to new ideas and images of the Enlightenment, which they readily adopted as part of their own modernity. Theological and spiritual influences, as well as the social, cultural, and institutional connections within the city, now truly cosmopolitan and diverse than ever before in its long history, were at the foundation of religious art and architecture for the Armenian artisans and architects of the city. It is this mixture of talent and influence that is readily seen in church collections. A commitment to detail. Now these are obviously miters, heavily embroidered in a very difficult medium overall. Again, we have our circle here. Again, the inscription's very important, right around 1800. The facial feature here is smaller than your thumbnail, but notice all the different patterns of woven wire. This is gold, silver, which is electrum, gold, and or silver, okay? And the three-dimensional imagery here is substantial. This person was a master, okay? One of my favorites, this comes from a vakasa or a collar. This is only about, well, it's only about that big, okay? It's about 4 inches or less. Facial features are as small as the image of Christ. Over to the left and over to the right is no larger than your small fingernail. And if you notice, closed eyes, always shown in death, never in the agony of the crucifixion. Droplets of blood here and also here. But again, superb example of the needlecraft. What I had talked about before when I was here, and also in numerous lectures throughout the country, I'll be giving 2 more in Ottawa in March, is the fact that we've been able to document an unknown miniature tradition that rivals the artistic flair of monasteries and the scriptoria of those monasteries. Chalice cover is very important because they cover the cup of life. This is drawn from Eastern Anatolia based upon the architectural features. There's the detail. Typical architecture of traditional Armenian church architecture. Again, 1813, the motif here on the chalice cover, Christ coming out of the cup, is more of a Greek Orthodox tradition than it is Armenian in nature. But it has all the elements of the Passion, and it really is a stunning piece to show, again, the cross-referencing amongst Greek and Armenian women. The Agnus Dei, this is one of my favorites. It comes from the Church of Holy Cross. It's at least 250 to 300 years old. It actually fell apart in our hands because of the weight of the pearls and the gold and the silver thread. This is real human hair along the side for the archangels, Michael and Gabriel. The Agnus Dei, the Lamb of Christ, comes back into Armenian art probably in the 14th century, initially in Cilicia, but it becomes a dominant theme. It's mostly drawn from a Western tradition, though it does appear in early Armenian art before it drops out for multiple centuries. So again, it's almost as if it's being reintroduced back into the old traditions, and it's much better to use the symbol of the sacrifice than the crucifixion, with all of its negative connotations of suffering. This is what they would look like placed over the cup of life, that is the chalice, which are in their own right unique pieces of art. Stoles, this is on the frontal part. This is an extremely rare example. We have God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and then we have a character here, but all these characters here, there's 12 of them. When I showed this to Archbishop R. Marchese, he said, well, it's just the 12 apostles. And I went, 6 of them are women. And the last time I checked, there's no indication that any of the apostles were in drag. This will not be good. And he went, oh, it's Old Testament stories. And this is where Christ, who holds the book of the New Covenant, is acting as a representative of Abraham and the tree of Abraham. But since you always have to have the entire Trinity expressed, it's dualistic in nature. If we go to the one to the left, it's Western inspired from the French tradition. And look at the miniature here, the folds of drapery and the facial features of the Mother of God. Brilliant workmanship. And then notice the changes all along in relation to the embroidery tradition to create, for architect majors and art majors, depth of field. This helps create a three-dimensional image instead of using pigment. It's very difficult to do. I used to do a lot of embroidery when I was a graduate student. It's a wonderful way to relax, by the way. We do have schools established. This is from Haruti and Bejian School that produced large altar covers. These were like 3 to 4 meters wide and tall. Other stamps here are when a piece may have come in. These are the turas of the Ottoman Sultan on metalwork to guarantee the purity of the metal, and then the manufacturing marks. So there's large amounts of material within the Constantinople collections that have never been studied. Altar curtains. Now, some are old, some are new. And here, we have a very interesting piece. It's a much, much older piece, and what it shows is the Mother of God. It's a Western tradition predominantly. She's carrying a lantern. Does anybody know the symbolism behind that? It's more Western than it is Eastern Orthodox. The Mother of God is the guiding light for salvation. And so here, this little piece that comes from a much older fabric, and you can't really see it because it's an altar curtain that's like 12 feet, 14 feet long, and 10 feet high. It's only about that big. Okay? But it's beautifully embroidered. There's a wonderful flowing gown. She has the lantern leading the way. This is one I talked about before. If we looked at the details here, all of the eyes, you can see it a little bit over here on this person, on this angel. It denotes that Far Eastern tradition. This is block printed, and it probably comes from India, Madras, India, substantial Armenian population in Madras, India. Okay, Constantinople treasures offered during pilgrimage, either at the Church of St. James in Jerusalem or in Echmiadzin. And again, the embroidery, this commitment to figurative forms really becomes a major, major Armenian contribution. We do not have similar examples like this in embroidery, and very little in general in the post-Byzantine Greek Orthodox tradition at all. Okay? And some of the themes are historical or part of the historiography of Armenian Christianity, dealing with the sufferings of St. Gregory. Okay? And then other examples here, again, note these are of Constantinople origin. In fact, the Catholicos asked us a few years ago when we gave them 2 copies of the first volume if we'd be interested in studying the material in Armenian. And of course the answer was yes, because no one has looked at only those objects that came from the wealthiest, most powerful, and most prestigious of all the Armenian patriarchal sees. Okay, no one has looked at that Constantinople material in the Church of St. James, or the Treasury of St. James, and certainly not in Armenia itself. So again, there's a ready source of information. Again, this is an altar cover. Overall, very interesting. If you notice, really the only person with a very dark face is our poor friend Judas here, okay? He's always shown, and in some examples we had, I mean, he's got a hunchback. And it's like deformity is, you know, is part of evil, right? And like there's no reference to Judas having a hunchback. And you could almost do Monty Python here, it's like, or Young Frankenstein. You know, I'm a brilliant surgeon. I can do something about that hump. And, you know, and he looks the wrong way. It's on the side. But that becomes a standard method to denote evil, is through the process of deformation overall, or changing in the color. Who were the Armenians who made the donations to the churches? Well, the inscriptions from liturgical metal work and craftsmanship, artists responsible for the execution were predominantly laymen, especially in these late centuries. This is a marked contrast to those who produced Armenian manuscripts. Scribes and artists were almost without exception clergymen, usually working within a monastery in an isolated or near isolated rural environment. Metal workers, whether crafting objects in iron, bronze, or copper, or jewelers working with silver, gold, and precious stones, were in an urban or semi-urban context, a town or a village. As for the liturgical garments, altar curtains, chalice covers, here we go again, and other textiles are reserved for female creators. This tripartite division of arts and crafts in medieval and early modern Armenia, clergy, craftsmen, women with textiles, has not been sufficiently studied and will probably yield interesting information on the social stratification of Armenian life. In this way, that is, by creating liturgical art, the church succeeded in integrating all elements of society around its daily ritual. And I'll show you now a sense of community, social identity as seen through inscriptions. I'm not going to read them all because there's quite a bit. But it says here, this holy and costly sacerdotal set of vestments is a memorial gift to Holy Cross Church of the village of Pukchek in Akin. Embroidered, and here it comes the list: diamond, crosses, pearls, silver, namely the crown, and then all the objects made by this one family. The crown, the amici, the cope, the stole, the manoplies, the girdle, and the slippers, through the provision and subsidy of the God-loving Hovanes Aga. Now comes, aren't I such a pious person? I have given, my son has given, my daughter's given, my wife has given, okay. Relatives from visible and invisible tribulations, it was donated 1834. And that's on the inside of a large, heavy cope. Again, 1779, from Patriarch of Constantinople and the second Lelegate of Holy Echmiadzin in the year 1779. Presented to the Patriarch of Constantinople right there in 1779 or thereabouts. And again, we have wonderful images. We have the angel Gabriel, the Holy Mother of God here, the disciples, and all the faces are different. But if you look at the workmanship, as I said, it's extraordinary in nature, very small miniatures. 1825, in nature, again, Matesi is a pilgrim. Person goes on pilgrimage, he donates two things. One is donated to the church where he's going for the pilgrimage, and the one is donated to his home church. That was required by religious rite almost. I mean, you had to honor your local church as well. Liturgical garments were the product of domestic production and not state-sponsored, since political independence had disappeared in the 14th century. Patronage came from the surviving social hierarchies in Armenian society, including laity. And again, 1791. But by 1791, we're already seeing a major change taking place. Here we have an altar curtain or a niche cover on a side chapel, and all these people died in the same year. Could have been, it's obviously from Eastern Anatolia, donated, and they could have died in an earthquake, which is very common, or they could have died in relation to a potential uprising or a program or whatever. But they're all listed as such. Here's one of my favorites, and the reason why it's important is because of its historical concern. It is a radiance done in an old style. It's dated to 1746 or thereabouts. Typical in terms of the more conservative tradition of Armenian altar art. But the back of it is very important because it reinforces a common practice that was done by both Arabs as well as Turks. It's called the Sürgün, forced deportation of populations, requisition of forced labor. Those were predominantly children that were taken from their village as a head tax to work in the shipyards and galley yards in İstaniye in Istanbul, which in that region had 3 Armenian churches because the majority of galley workers were Armenian. And it says it right there. This holy radiance is in memory of the boys who were in Istanbul for the enjoyment of Everig's Kaiseri, St. Theodore Church, Amen. And that's the inscription. And that's what it documents. Very rarely did these children ever come back to their place of origin. Ever. This holy cross is in memory of Usta, that means foreman, of Gazar's wife, Tahiri, at the gate of the Holy Cross Church in Üsküdar, 1780. The example to the left, by the way, has very strong parallels with similar examples from the Greek Orthodox community on Crete. Actually, Professor Emeritus and Endowed Chair Dr Ron Marchese was unaware of that when I sent him the photograph. He said, really, this is very interesting. So overall, there really was this cross-fertilization that was indeed taking place. And very, very similar to those communities that existed elsewhere. A holy relic here, 1745, one of the oldest of the pieces. O clerics, pray for the mercy at the feet of the saints for my sinful self, for my parents, and they're mentioned as well, my brothers and my entire family, and you shall receive what you seek in the year 1194, 1745. It's a reliquary in nature, one of my favorite pieces because the inscription is not only very touching, it just enhances a very simple but elegant piece of workmanship. This is very important. This was given to the Patriarch after John the IX had passed away. It comes from the Holy See, the Papal See in the Vatican. This holy sign of the cross was granted by Cardinal Cardinal Louis Antonio Beluga, to the late Patriarch Hovhannes Vardapet, and was ornamented with gems and gold by Patriarch Hakub, a memorial to St. James, which is in Jerusalem in the year 1743. Amethysts, beautiful cameo here. Absolutely, and then there's the reliquary on the reverse, but a brilliant piece of the jeweler's art. There are large vestries as well. Memory of the soul of the late Mina Samira of the village of Akin, of his wife Anna, who is alive, and they're living in a sleep, family members, etc. Here is the belt of Golad IX. It's now in the Patriarchal Museum, very simple in nature. Next to it is the filigree work, which Armenian craftsmen were second to none. They were the best in producing the fine wire thread of gold and silver for filigree work and for embroidery. Overall, they surpassed the Greeks and the Levantines completely. One of my favorites, and Barbara has seen this before, it's on a silver platter that was used in church, given to the Church of St. Gregory the Illuminator in Galata, in memory of the souls of Father Marcos, the saintly priest, and his son, Arkal Aga, who is asleep in Christ. And let those who buy or sell this be eliminated from the register of life. And those who enjoy using it, remembered before the Lord the souls who are asleep. So we have a curse placed upon anybody that comes afterwards that would sell it, take it, and donate it to the state. The state periodically had the right to call in gold and silver from the churches through the patriarch or through direct orders to pay for a very bad monetary policy. The Church of Holy Cross, during the war with Russia in the late 1700s, had to come up with 6,000 kilos of gold and silver.
Wow.
Now, I don't have a photograph, and I wish I did. But I've been at the Patriarch, Kate, and in one of the side rooms were relics. I get goosebumps about this. Who they are and what they are is all unknown, because all the information is on the container. Those are consecrated items. The relic is taken out. No one knows who they belong to. But the gold and silver encasements were called in by the Ottoman state. And all that knowledge, all that history, all those families that donated, as the title of this started, objects of faith, is long gone. It's long gone. Social status. Well, I'm not going to go through this because we're getting a little bit late and I do want to get to the metalwork, okay, overall. But social status is based upon names, okay, Hoja, Chalebi, and so forth. These were terms to differentiate, and Aga, to differentiate the Armenian elite. So we would call them today the Ottoman Armenians. And yes, they wore different things. There were 165 names mentioned in research done in the 1980s, and they're substantiated in the patriarchal records. We'll read the last part. Their social status was evident not only in terms of the titles they were addressed at, but what they wore. To wear a fur coat and to cover the head with a kavuk, a quilted turban clothing differed not only from the ordinary Armenians, but also the Muslim Turks. It was of the type that only privileged Turkish officials could wear. Clothing marked a person's place in society. The non-Muslim or Zimmis subjects wore a different garment than one worn by Muslim citizens. In a society where an individual's clothing was an important symbol, such outward trappings implied more than a special care of one's appearance. They gave the person a special status, immediate recognition. The Emir was neither an ordinary member of the Armenian millet, nor a simple Zimmi subject of the Sultan. He had a special niche within the Ottoman ruling class. Okay, that was important stuff. I'm going to go to the last part. On the objects, individuals that were of an emerging middle class start to usurp, certainly before 1850, the titles. Although the number of objects cited with inscriptions is small, they do provide a general picture of those groups who donated objects to various churches in Istanbul. 45% of objects were donated by those who had made a pilgrimage, Matesi. And of these, 12% held titles of Aga and Amira, yet they are not listed in any official documents as such. 23% of those looked at held the title of Aga, while 19% held the title of Amira. And again, they have usurped the terms because they're not in the official list, either in the Patriarchate or in the Sultanic records. They just usurped them. Of the occupations listed, 11% were distinguished by the term teacher or its variants, which had already lost prestige, while less than 1% was from the trades, goldsmith, printer, foreman, or ironsmith. It is interesting to note that only one individual was referenced as a saraf, banker. He also held the title of Aga. Only 2 objects were donated on dates of religious significance. The 6th of January, which is Christmas. And it's there's the blessing of the waters and all that. And Feast of the Mother of God on August 15th. Donations on specific dates of religious significance not only increase the symbolic importance of the donations, but also the prestige of the donor or benefactor. Okay? The usurpation of titles is all about one's dignitas. Okay? One's status in society. Well, the response that we do get, and we see this, with the recognized elites, they start to use different terms. It also should be noted that many possessed a nomenclature that enhanced their character. Superior in honor, honorable dignity, of princely race, even though there's no connection with the older aristocracies from Cilicia. Noble ancestry, prince of great honor, bright prince, great prince, freeborn man of noble ancestry, leader of the nation, of great honor, leaders of the nation, full of grace, or something else, and strengthened by Christ. The latter phrase only used, this is so fun, it is only used by Arete and Bejion because no one could challenge him in terms of his status or wealth. Prestige was the driving force for many in this group to attain a recognized higher position amongst their rivals and consequently a special place in high society. Now let's move into the metalwork, since we talked about a lot of things and we'll be finishing pretty soon. Unlike illuminated manuscripts, which were produced typically for the church and privileged society, metal objects were purchased for household as well as ceremonial use. Social hierarchies that underwrote much of this material splendor of the Armenian church. That is, those who were patrons of the arts commissioned metalwork of sumptuous material bearing subjects specific by the client. The wealthy middle class bought objects of legally precious materials overall. Back to our silversmiths. As I said, you have 33 in one small location in Kumka. The styles they imitate or enhance, well, they come from the neoclassical tradition, Western art. They come from the French Imperial I and French Imperial II styles. Okay? It's very difficult to date these. But you can. You can get a reference date. Here we have the manufacturer's mark. Here we have the silver stamp, and here we have the Sultanic Tura that was stamped in numerous places. So if the Ottomans want to call it in, they could call it in and say that's pure silver and not a forgery, even though we have those. And then at the very end are the assayer's marks on the bottom. A variety of fans, standards, and so forth. The workmanship is superb. And here we have 3. There's actually there are 4 fans. They are used in procession, obviously, dictating or defining the life of Christ. And notice here, even in the detail, okay, the image of Christ on the cloth, and here it is, there. That's smaller than your fingernail, your little fingernails. This is one of my favorite photographs, Christ looking back at the image. Okay? And so, again, you can't even see this if you're 2 feet away. You would say, well, why don't you? Why? Well, you don't offer God schleppy stuff. Period. Okay? You're blessed with talent. You are expected to do this. My favorites are the chalices because they're almost all unique. They're one-of-a-kind pieces of art. This dates to the late 1700s. And it has both vertical and multiple horizontal composition. That's what it looks like there, and you can see God the Father, the crucifixion of Christ here, and Christ despondently in the Garden of Gethsemane with our sleeping disciples couldn't even stay away from Jesus. I mean, we think you'd be interested in what's going to happen. Okay? And if you fall asleep, you're going to miss it all. So, on this is one of my most impressive pieces of religious art. What flows from the body of Christ, from the Sacred Heart, which is predominantly a Western motif in terms of Roman Catholicism. It's the grape, it's the blood of Christ, and it goes into the vat filled with grapes, and in the process of the consecration of the Eucharist, it becomes the body and blood of Christ. I know of one example of this that appears in late medieval Germanic art, but it's not on a chalice. This is all done in gold, as you can see, gold and silver. There were one-of-a-kind pieces, as this one to the left, but there were also pieces that were imitated, some large, some small. One church, the one at the back, it's a smaller one. It comes from the church of Besiktas, which was the primary church of the Balians, the chief architects of the outer court. But it was made a little bit later than the one in the foreground, which comes from Balat. They liked it so much, they wanted one for their church. But all along the base here, we have the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we also have images from the Old Testament, the God creating Adam and Eve and all that type of stuff. And it shows the natural environment and all that type of stuff. Here are some examples of the workmanship and the castings. Quite lovely in nature. Again, drawn from more 19th century art here in terms of the altar or jajank or reliquary. Some fine examples of casting that's obverse and reverse here, and chasing in terms of the formation of the bases. These are my favorite because there are two of them. These are incense boxes, and they're done in more of the Armenian style of church architecture. These are also very old, probably in the 1700s. Here is an altar ornament done in a wonderful style of 19th century casting and art. And at the bottom right here, which the people at Holy Cross did not even know, we found the inscription. And it was dedicated to, read it, dedicated to Vespasian. They didn't even know it was from their primary benefactor from that church. It was an altar reliquary. And he had donated a number of objects to other churches because he was that well respected within the Armenian community. But it is a brilliant piece. One of the very few examples we found of the Myron vessel, the holy oil. Here, it's done in a brilliant example. At the bottom, Pentecost. Okay? The head comes off, the wings fold up so you can put the holy oil in. There's the very top with little garnets there for the eyes. Brilliant piece of workmanship. And here we have all of the individual figures along the base of the celebration for Pentecost. When individuals are sick and they can't attend church or go to communion, these little arks, the remnants of the host, are transported to those that are sick, that the priest will do periodically. Here we have an old example, certainly pre-1750 example, of a traditional type of fan. And over to the left, 19th century ewer and basin used to wash the hands. But notice all the instruments along the side. One of the things that takes place in 1850, by 1850, the Armenian Opera House is established. Armenian orchestras are established in the new city. And the new city, which has all the architectural refinement, basically of a Paris, becomes a hotbed of European culture and art. Okay? And so this was made with all of the appropriate instruments, including a very interesting bell right here. That's old style. That's part of the instruments. Reliquaries that are indeed unique in their own right. I've never seen examples of this nature even in the Roman Catholic rite. The workmanship is phenomenal. Okay, this has more of the imperial, the second imperial style of the late 19th century. Again, the filigree work of a cross. Again, the use of the Sacred Heart, which is not a traditional Armenian motif, certainly appears regularly. This small little ornament is one of the finest examples I've ever seen. It's a kayak. It's the typical type of vessel that was used for fishermen in the area of Kumkapi, okay, in the fish market. It's only about that big. And it's the bottom ornament of a chandelier. Okay? Very small, but brilliantly produced. Again, the motif here, very interesting. This is in Greek Orthodox tradition, the Virgin Mother or the Mother of God of Tenderness. And we see this again coming from the eastern part into Constantinople. This crown came from, as the inscription here, it comes from Ankara, okay, in nature. Again, there's a good example of it, this tender expression that appears. It also appeared on a large altar cover from Caesarea in eastern Anatolia. Pieces do migrate. This is all cast in gold, and we have God the Father, God the Son, and St. Gregory here. The Holy Spirit is right there. Brilliant piece of casting work overall. There's our cross again that has a lot of Greek Orthodox tradition in it in terms of the way it's constructed. The Agnus Dei becomes a common feature on textiles as well as on metalwork. The weaving of a gold belt, okay? The girdle around the base of the celebrant, around his waist. Again here, altar censers, but the images and the motifs are what really stands out here and here. This is, I can't remember the name now. Proto-martyr is
Stephen.
Stephen, thank you. Thank you. St. Stephen as deacon. St. Theodore, normally we would say St. Gregory, but the image is much older as one of the military saints. Goes back to the Armenian tradition of St. Theodore and not, St. George of the Dragon.
And not St. George?
No, it's Theodore. Large fan with a seraphim, or seraph, that's the singular. Workmanship in gold and silver, diamonds. We were allowed to handle these without any qualms or tribulations or concerns. And this is the writing desk of one of the patriarchs, done in beautiful filigree. Again, our altar jajank. We saw that image before. Brilliant piece. And then here are the elements of the Passion, done in wonderful casting. Although hesitant, it can be argued that in the individuals listed and their families form the upper tier of Armenian social hierarchy in this novel. Many of these individuals made substantial contributions to their millet, usually in the form of costly expenditures, such as church construction, church repairs, firmans for such work, financial support for schools and hospitals, control of the patriarchal institutions, including the selection of the patriarch. For whatever reason, and here we are at Fresno State, why do people want to have their name hung on a building? I just can never understand that. I mean, it's like, okay, fine, you've got the money to make the endowment, so what else is new? Okay, I just don't understand this, but we have this throughout human history, this idea to be known for posterity. But when you think about objects that were never meant to be examined, objects, however, may indicate the second tier of the Armenian elite, especially since the vast majority held a more pious title of Marchese, pilgrim, with few achieving the higher designation of Amira. None of them, by the way, were recognized, even if they usurped the name, or Aga. The title of Marchese or pilgrim was conferred on those who made the journey to Jerusalem. No mean undertaking. The use of the term for all family members as Marchese increased the importance of the entire family and not just the individual or individuals mentioned. Some titles were joined, such as Pasha, Marchese, and Aga. Even when those titles appear, there is no indication they were part of the moneyed class of the Sarafs. Thank you.